Welcome home, where we provide information, inspiration, and motivator after motivator after motivator here on America's Next. I have Cortni Grange here with me today. How you doing, Cortni?
What's going on, good brother? I appreciate you for having me here.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. Uh, First of all, I want to appreciate all of our guests who are coming into the building. As you come in, please like the video, share the video, let your friends know, text and tag people, letting them know that we are getting ready to have a valuable discussion with a brother who's not just local, he's also national and international. So we are in for a great discussion today. Cortni, where are you from?
Peace, good brother. Originally from Largo, Maryland. Grew up in that area. My roots go back to Linstead, Jamaica, though. So got a lot of good family lineage over here.
Okay. So you were born in the Maryland area?
I actually was born in Boston, Massachusetts. Moved to Maryland when I was really young. And I've been, for the most part, raised in Maryland until I went off to college.
Okay. What was it like for you growing up in Maryland?
Man.
Talk about it.
Prince George's County, Maryland is probably is one of the most unique places I've ever been privileged to live. For a long time, it's been regarded as one of the areas that has the largest concentration of Black wealth in the country. Right. But being so close to DC, you get a lot of different demographics. And so I was raised around a lot of different cultures. Even though everything was predominantly Black. And of course, that also came with its own aspects of nuance and beauty, right? I grew up on a regular basis. I could go a whole day and only see Black people. When I go to the store, when I go to school, my mom, everybody in my neighborhood. But then, of course, all the teachers that were teaching us were mostly white. Or when we would have to go on field trips and things, right? Like you had to start learning how to acclimate very quickly to the surroundings of the general DC area. And so it was a bit of a microcosm in a sense where like our Blackness was never really threatened in our communities. And because it was a large concentration of Black wealth, you're talking a lot of folks in the DC area who work for federal government. They get their good government job, they move their family to Prince George's County, and life continues from there. So it was a lot of different things that I got to see growing up from that perspective. But it also wasn't void of its hardships because, a lot of times they say you can take the person out the hood, but you can't take the hood out the person. Right. So depending upon what values, morals, and beliefs you brought with you from where you grew up prior to coming to this area, a lot of times we would see that play out as well. And so I saw more violence in my neighborhood than I ever saw when I would go, kick it with my boys and my cousins that live in a more urban or a more rougher setting, which always would trip me out because it's like, bro, like, what are y'all doing?
Right. So let's break some of this down. People tend to distinguish whether or not they're from PG County. Is that correct?
Yes, indeed, they do.
And they do that because, and correct me where I'm wrong. They do that because of the quality of the people who live in the community.
Yeah, you get that. I mean, Maryland is largely broken down into counties. So you got Prince George's County, Anne Arundel County, Baltimore County, all of these different areas, but then there's the towns within that county. And so Prince George's County just happens to be one that has a lot of mixing because, like I talked about, largest concentration of wealth, but we got a lot of hoods in PG County too, like actual hoods.
Oh, yeah.
Being so close to one another, all of these kids mixing in schools with one another. You might, for example, when we first moved to Maryland, the block that I lived on was like a brand new development, brand new, at the time, $250,000, $300,000 homes. Okay. But you go literally up the block and around the corner, and you're back in the hood.
Oh, I get it. I get it.
In the school together.
Oh, okay.
So there was a lot of cross pollination of a lot of different things for different.
Okay. People. So the first thing that I want to point to is the fact that this is one of those areas that we tend to overlook when we talk about the community. In this case, the African American community, or some people might call it the Black community. Yeah. We always, a lot of the time, we go straight to the poverty. We go straight to the poor people. We go straight to the people who are completely disadvantaged. And I don't know that we spend enough time realizing that there are areas like PG County where you have large middle and middle upper class African Americans that are a force to be reckoned with. I don't know if we talk about that reality, that everybody who identifies as a member of my community and your community is not always just above the poverty line.
That's true. That's very true. And the financial or economic standing that, you know, we grew up in or that we were exposed to at younger ages in our lives, it really has no bearing on your development as a Black person, right? Like, you're going to have to deal with whatever you have to deal with coming from where you're from, right? Whether it's privilege or it's lack. The balance that we all have to get to is the hard part, right? How do you get from being impoverished to being in a sense of like, I am not less than? How do you go from being privileged to realizing you're not better than anybody else? Right? At the end of the day, we're all going to experience pain. It is the one thing that we will all have in common. And nobody's pain is greater or lesser than another person simply because of their personal experience. It's all pain. And that's what links us. And for me, that's always been the thing that allowed me to like see the balance and everything was, you know, I could go to my neighborhood and I would see kids stealing their parents' BMW to joyride because they didn't want to drive their Honda Civic around. Versus kids in, you know, the neighborhood up the street from me where I would sometimes go and hang out and like there were no cars other than the one car that the whole family had. So nobody would disrespect that vehicle to steal it, right? Because it was how you got your food. And so these polarities living so close to one another for me always have me very neutralized in terms of my areas of my life where I was less than versus where I was greater. Because like I didn't live in these neighborhoods because we were privileged, right? Like my mother and I rented a room in another person's house so that I could live in this neighborhood. It wasn't like we owned this home. So even my personal setting versus what I was seeing around me was very different the whole time that I was in, you know, Prince George's County.
So when we get an area where you can interact and diversify your life with people who have stable households, despite who might be living around the corner or the fact that you're not there because you're rich, it changes our opportunity set a little bit when you can interact with people who really have quality of life. And what tends to germinate in those type of areas is some of our best and brightest. You know, some of our best and brightest come out of areas where we're very competitive, we are educated, we are cultured. We realize that we are on a upward and forward mobility pipeline. You know, you get a lot of talent out of those communities. And what I want to kind of talk about is this: do those people who live in those types of areas have a different responsibility to produce things that are going to help the overall community? Like, don't just be joyriding in your parents' BMW and taking all of that opportunity and just waste it. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I wouldn't say they have a different level of responsibility. I would say they have a different level of resources. And so what we do with our resources is how we show our responsibility. Right? If you don't have a lot and you do way more than what people would think or imagine with a little, then you're praised for that, right? But if you've got a lot and you do just a little bit with that, sometimes you can be condemned. So it's not as, I would say it's not as easy to ascertain like what we should be doing based on where we're from and the advantages or disadvantages we have. But it is something to say, like, what are you doing with the resources you've been given?
Sure.
And that baseline of it for me is always where it goes, right? If you are using your resources to improve yourself and to improve others, then in my book, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Sure. So when I look at areas where, you know, you don't have 2,000 or 3,000 people who are in the middle and upper class, the whole area is a food desert. 98% of people are on welfare. Most homes don't have a man in the home. And in that environment, you see young people committing crimes against one another, you know, standing outside, smoking, doing ciphers, disrespecting the neighborhood. To an extent, you say, well, they also don't have the positive role models. They also don't have the profound conversations that are going to change them day in and day out, right? But when you see some of those same behaviors in an area like PG County, maybe on some of the blocks where everybody else on the street is really doing well for themselves, it's more like you really don't have to be doing that.
Yeah.
You're going out of your way to behave in a manner that you don't have to. We're all going in a more positive direction than that. Yeah. And so in areas where you do have the luxury of people who are progressive minded, you know, we still have people who behave as if they're in a totally disadvantaged area. And so when I talk about your responsibility being different when you have access to that type of diversity of people, I'm saying get your head in the game. Your next door neighbor is a millionaire. Where are you and where are you going? Can you have conversations? Can you obtain mentorship that can get you on a track to move up and forward? Because it's not like you down there in the desert where it's not a positive role model for miles and miles and miles.
Yeah. Well, I would say yes. And there are aspects of our society that aren't positive just because they're present, right?
Because they're what?
Just because they're present, right? And so I know just as many young Black men who have challenges with their relationships with women, with their self-understanding, with being vulnerable with themselves, that grew up with their fathers as ones that didn't grow up with fathers, right? And so that absence doesn't always equate to the reason why. It largely, in my opinion, has more to do with the structure of parenting that's been put around you.
Okay.
Like I said, my family's from Jamaica initially. So like for a large portion of my life, I grew up with Caribbean like structure.
What's that?
And I can tell you this now, right? Like more often than not, if you meet somebody from the Caribbean that was raised in a Caribbean household, I don't care how hood they are, there's certain things that they understand, right? When they were young, they likely didn't go outside and play a lot because their parents was like, we in the hood, you ain't going out there, get inside and read a book, right? They're used to a certain amount of discipline. Now, whether they accepted that discipline, rejected it, and rebelled against it, or they had a home environment that was able to convey the purpose behind the discipline, that's where it varies. But the discipline was always there because all of us came from something that was less than where we currently were. There's nobody that I know that moved from Jamaica, right, that was well off in Jamaica and moved into the hood in America. Nobody that I've ever met. I've met people that have moved from the hood in Jamaica to the hood in America, or from the middle class in Jamaica to like slightly moving into middle class in America. But like the lines there, this is always a step up for us. Right. And so everyone comes with that certain level of accountability from a parental perspective. Now, if you're coming from an area where, like, let's say your family was from the same area you from, right? Your parents, your grandparents, everything you've seen for the past 4, 5, 6 generations has been one thing. That is where it tends to metastasize into a lack of responsibility, because who have you seen be responsible? Whether there's a father and a mother in the house or just one person. If you haven't seen people be responsible, those examples that you talk about, if that millionaire next door, you know, is an ain't shit person, it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't actually influence in the way we want it to. And these are the nuances of these communities that I think often get overlooked. It's not who's next door to you. Like, I knew most of my neighbors. I didn't engage with most of my neighbors for a reason, right? Like, there was a lot that went on that our economic status didn't really show the basis for what was actually happening. And that's challenging when you're talking about a 14, 15, 16-year-old person to navigate all of these nuances of not just adulthood, but economic status, societal status, upbringing differentiation. All this stuff is like you trying to do all this while you're just trying to go kick it, have some fun, play some sports, and probably talk to a few young ladies. Like, it was a lot impacted. And this was, 20 some odd years ago when I was coming up. Today, the young people I get to work with today, the people that I've seen, for the past 10 years and working with young folks, I do not know what my generation would have done if they had to deal with the things I see young people dealing with today.
Wow.
Because it's more complex and there's more influence coming in. When I was young, I was excited when Bone Thugs and Harmony's Crossroad came on the box because somebody requested it. Now you can go watch anything you want instantly on here. And so the level of influence is way greater, which means the level of ability to be responsible is even harder because you've got more stuff being thrown at you from all these different angles that may or may not be putting you in a position to be a responsible citizen or an empowered member of your community, or just an intelligent young person who's trying to figure out their way in life. Like, it all can adjust and change.
Sure. Eleanor Jewell provided a comment. She says, hi, I think you also have to consider the impact of society on the self-esteem and self-belief within Black people, regardless of their economic status. She also said, the material resources in a better neighborhood don't always translate into greater self-development when society still condemns who you are.
That's right.
Now that brings me to my next point, because that's in the same vein of what you were saying, Courtney, which is it's not always where you are, but it's how you are, and how you are is directly connected to your family values, the conversations that are happening in your household that determine who you really are. Do we need more think tanks in our communities? Whether you're in a disadvantaged area or an advantaged area, do we need more think tanks where we can have conversations that connect directly to our perspectives of ourselves, so that we can counteract what society might be pushing to us through poison media?
Mm-hmm. I would very easily say yes. I do believe that we have a lot of these things already in existence, but how much we take advantage of them is also a conversation, right? I've never been to a hood that didn't have some sort of empowered group of people trying to make a difference, whether it's, the re-entering citizens that then took over a plot of land and turned it into a farm. The folks who have traveled their indigenous pathways and now are pushing the more African traditional belief systems or structures of who we are and where we come from. The homeboy who was just like, yo, I don't want to see this no more. So like turn their basement into a community center. Like, we've got these things. I think that sometimes it can be challenging to figure out like what to do once you've thought of the stuff in the think tank. Like, once you've sat down, you've gone through it, and you've hashed out the details, like what's going to be your plan of action, right?
Yeah,
that can be the most challenging part, because a lot of thinking can happen, but not a lot of action can take place.
Mm-hmm. So when we look at areas in the Midwest, you mentioned Bone Thugs and Harmony. Mm-hmm. You take a city like Cleveland, where for 3 or 4 streets, mind you, some people they don't leave their street very often, as unbelievable as that might sound. But for a 3 or 4 street radius, it'd be really hard to find a positive influence. That's also a reality in America. And so when we say that, think tanks do exist across America, are they sticking out like a sore thumb?
No.
Are they just as readily available as the Boys and Girls Club?
I know.
Because if they're not, then that's where I stand in the gap and say we've got more work to do.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And it's not always going to be somebody who lives in one of those disadvantaged areas who comes up with the vision and the idea and then the resources. I think it's also going to be people like you who live in PG County who say, listen, it's nothing for me to garner $70,000 and put this particular organization in a particular neighborhood, because you already know how to think big.
Yeah.
Right. And so we've at some point we've got to see a person's ability to think big as a gift. You're gifted when you can think big, because there are a lot of people who are only thinking about the day that they're in and what's right in front of their face. And so do we have enough think tanks, places that stick out. Like every time I get into a conversation with somebody, they mention the Boys and Girls Club, right? But do we have enough places where you go and you process adulthood, where you go and you process rites of passage into, you know, maturity? I don't think we do.
No, and I wouldn't say that. In order to do that, see, this is where it can get intricate. When we talk about rites of passage, there's so many different rites that we need to pass through, whether you're talking about adolescence to teenage to young adult to so on and so forth. The rites of passage that can be specific to your community, right? And so we do have these things. They may not always have the most positive spin on them, because the communities that have been encapsulated, so to speak, when you talk about having so many square blocks of not a positive influence, they're thinking in that tank. It's happening. It's just not in the positive light that you would want it to be, from a perspective of what is going to take this community from a place of where it is now to where it can be more abundant, right? Because a lot of it isn't even economic at the end of the day, right? Like, money is relative to the value that we give to it. If you live in a community that's based on bartering and helping, and it's a small, tight-knit community, and, like, you know what I'm saying? You've got certain aspects of people who are willing to go out, get things, and then come back in. That's a part of their role in the community. Anything is possible. And I can say this, you know, coming from a family that was raised in Jamaica, and we're from the country in Jamaica. Like, we're not from a city. We're from areas where I remember when the first street light got put up. Before that, it was like everybody's driving in the dark. There are no stop signs, and you just kind of get it, right? There's one market for the whole town. Everyone goes to this one market. Everyone also brings all their food to sell to this one market because they know that's where everybody's going to be. And so there are a lot of communal principles that we're exercising just because it's in our DNA, that we might not be pushing towards the right aspect of what's going to make our societies more harmonious and abundant. For example, you got gang, you got street community, you got street knowledge on every culture. I've worked in corporate America for over 15 years, and I can tell you that any executive that I've seen, you could sit them next to whoever was the head dude in the community, and they can have an intelligent conversation about their environment, right? There's no lack of knowledge or thinking big. I would say in these areas, it's just, what are they applying it to? If you're applying it, think big to what's the next hustle, right? What's the next come up? It's a different thing, but it's the same wavelength of thinking. It's just where we're applying it. And that's the part where I believe you in terms of, like, or I agree with you that there aren't enough think tanks designed to create deeper harmony in our communities, to create environments where it's like, all right, what is the rites of passage that these young people need to go through in this community? What rites of passage did the parents not get that they need to go back and set up? Because you can't train the generation and then put them under leadership parents who haven't been trained.
That's right.
Now you're going to get conflict. And it is more likely that the young people will rebel and do their own thing than it will be that they will learn to balance with the adults, because that's not their job yet. They got to wait till they're older in life. For example, it wasn't until I had a son that I learned how to effectively communicate certain things that I had had trouble with growing up. Because now I could see, like, oh, I had my son at 30, right? And these are the things I experienced. My parents had me at 22 in college. And so to think that they were able to reason and think with the same level of clarity, intellect, and wisdom, knowledge applied over time, that I have been able to, is erroneous at best. Right? You're 22 years old. My father was from Jamaica. He went to college with one pair of pants and a football scholarship. He has no idea what to do with a newborn baby. Come on. Right. But for me to go through my life having any sort of animosity to my father for not doing certain things that I believe he should have done, or that society tells me he should have done, is also erroneous. That man did what that man could do, and I respect him for that. I do what I can do, and I expect people to respect me for that. But the think tanks are challenging because we got to figure out community by community, and I think that's the end of it. Not the end, but to end the comment at this point that I'm making, because when we look at the Black community, it's not homogenous, right? You got a hood in every area, but all hoods ain't created equal. They're not the same, and so what Cleveland needs is not what Detroit needs. And how do you get that specific with the right resources for each individual community or tribal environment? Because these are just tribes, in my opinion. How do you get specific with that? Because the trickle down approach to things, even if we're talking about who's leading us at a national level, it still isn't going to be right because it's not specific enough.
You see, this is why I brought you on the show. America's Next Motivator is a home for thinkers, people who can conceptualize where we've been, where we are, and where we need to go. This gentleman is providing a great conversation for us today and a lot of things for us to think about. These are the types of conversations that have to happen in our communities. This is a think tank. We are processing and exchanging ideas here that now the public can take and use to manifest greater works in their community. Ladies and gentlemen, we are talking to Cortni Grange today, and we're not finished. We have a lot more to cover after this break, and we're going to find out more about this gentleman here, Cortni Grange. We'll be right back. America's Next Motivator. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern, Tuesday and Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern. America's Next Motivator, hosted by me, Cedric Riley, and sponsored by the Pride Empowerment Network. And we're back. Cortni, how you feeling out there?
I'm feeling good, brother. How you feeling this morning?
I'm feeling great. Now, as you graduated high school, what were your thoughts? What were your thoughts about the world, and what did you intend to do with yourself?
To be honest, man, at 17 and a half, coming out of high school, I wasn't doing a lot of world thinking. I was focused on getting up out of my mama's house, going far away, getting out of here. And that was pretty much it. I can't recall thinking really deeply about anything at that point other than those two things. But I was fortunate in terms of how I went about doing those two things. Like my actions put me in a better position than my thoughts set me up for, so to speak.
Okay. Now, we talked in pre-production, you mentioned that you are a freestyle car driver. What's that? When did you start doing that? You say you get in your car and just ghost ride
and just freestyle. I've been a road warrior for a long time. Traveling back and forth from like Connecticut to Maryland, and then in certain careers that I've had, doing a lot of like cross country traveling, 2 to 4 days a week on the road and then getting back home. And so when you spend that amount of time either traveling or specifically driving cars, you got to find ways to stay awake. And so one thing that always worked for me was just I get in the car, I pop in, it used to be a CD, but nowadays I'll pop in just some instrumentals and just start freestyling, and it'll keep me going and it'll keep me awake through a time. And I found that for me, it's more efficacious than coffee or anything else that I
Hold up. I thought that when you said that you were a freestyle car driver, that you like you do donuts outside the Walgreens, and you fishtail around the corner at will.
Bro.
Hold up, my brother. Hold on. But in fact, you're saying that you start freestyling in your car.
That's right.
All right. What you got for us this morning?
I knew you were going to go there.
Yeah.
Oh, man. For me, it's always environmental. Like, it can be something as 10:33 in the AM, on a call, getting my life together, trying to find the points of intersection to make my mind more of a feather. Float away, find it today as opposed to tomorrow. It's not promised, but it could be here as soon as the drop of a dime. On time, never off. Doesn't even have to rhyme. Sometimes it's just what's in my mind, but I flow the same time anytime I can find a beat to flow with it freely as I move.
Absolutely.
It's just whatever I want to say. Like, it's not, it doesn't have to be anything specific. It's just moving your mind forward as opposed to trying to compose, for me, is what keeps me awake. It keeps me sharp.
Can you talk about the power of being fluid between the real world around you and your inner etheric space? Talk about the power of that. Yeah, let's go.
Man, I am for those that know me well, know I'm a very principled person. But my principles, I'm very specific about where I source them from. Right? I believe that belief created by what we think largely lacks empathy. Belief created by what we feel often lacks logic. But belief that comes from a higher power usually is immutable, and it will cause no harm. It may hurt you, it may cause you some stress if you don't listen, but it won't cause you actual pain if you surrender to flowing with it. And so that's how I operate internally. I am very much a person who flows with everything. I don't personally take anything as right or wrong. I just take it as what I've experienced. And then what I do is based on my set of principles. Now, the outside world doesn't always work that way, right? The environments we come into contact with aren't always that harmonious, balanced, and principled, right? And there's a lot of other factors that go into experiencing the outside world. And so I constantly spend time balancing how much time I spend in the outside world versus how much time I spend within myself. I do a lot of introspection.
And see, that concept right there is one that we need to have a thorough understanding of throughout the world, throughout our country, throughout our neighborhoods. It shouldn't matter what neighborhood you go into. People should understand the value of introspection. See, I've had conversations with people who they might be able to sit down at a corporate round table with their urban outfit on and show the CEO how to make their next $1 billion. But when you start talking to them about introspection, that's where you lose them at.
Yeah.
Now, in order to make this even more of a victorious moment, because you just said something huge, how do we access our higher power? How can we do that?
I don't think that there's any one pathway to do that. But I will say that for me, belief is the combination of surrender and discernment. Okay. So when we surrender to what is being given to us, as opposed to trying to control it or influence it, once we surrender to it, it shows its real self. For example, if there is something that you have needed to say to somebody because it is your truth, but you have held back on saying that thing because it could potentially hurt their feelings. But in the process of holding back, they're continuously hurting your feelings because you haven't set the right boundary. Surrendering to the fact that you need to have that conversation, that you need to say your truth, and the outcome of that is unknown. Surrendering to the fact that that's going to be what you need to do, and doing it will provide you discernment, because as soon as you see how this person responds, it's going to tell you how much you should or should not be placing value in that situation. If you haven't told somebody how you feel, and their response to it is to shame you or to treat you as if your feeling is invalid, it immediately tells you a lot about that person. And that's discernment. Because like I said, that's a belief that's coming from a divine place. So it may cause you a little bit of uncomfort, but it's not going to harm you, because in the long run, you will be better off by knowing where you stand with this person. And so for me, that's a large part of the type of ethos that this exists in. How you get to that, what pathway you choose, religiously, spiritually, or otherwise, philosophically, is truly up to you. But my belief is that if you're not getting that, if you're not getting the ability to speak your truth, to use your discernment to create divine belief, then what you're using probably could use some adjustment.
Now, for those folks who might need to master discernment before they master the art of surrender, can we talk a little bit about how to discern? Because some people, in their lack of understanding of life itself, they might end up surrendering to something that's going to hurt them.
Yeah.
Some people might not know how to surrender, but they might know how to discern. You know, different things for different people. How do we discern what we should surrender to?
Yeah, well, I would say first and foremost, there's a difference between discernment and instinct, right? And so a lot of times when someone is instinctually moving, it can be perceived to be discernment, right? Because, well, I didn't think of that thing. I didn't know it. I just moved the way I was supposed to move. That's instinct. Discernment is not something that you have with yourself by yourself. It requires an additional energy of sorts. Now, what we call that energy, what we define it as, is where it becomes personal. But I define it as God. God mixed with my instincts creates my discernment, right? That's how you know the difference. But that in itself requires surrender, right? Because in order for you to know the difference between your instincts and your discernment, it means you gotta listen. Listening is surrendering, not listening with the intent to respond, but just listening for what you hear. For me, my discernment can be very sharp. And what I mean by that is it'll be things like, go that way. Yes, no, that person, not right now. Speak louder, speak softer, say nothing. And when I hear it, the more that I listen, the more that I surrender to it, the louder it gets and the more I can differentiate that voice. I call it a voice, but it's really a feeling. That feeling from my feelings, because they're not the same for me. But it takes that time to do it. So for me, the surrendering and the discernment are part and parcel. They can't be separated, because you've got to surrender to discernment in order to surrender to what you see in your life change. They got to go together. And it's funny, this is the conversation I was having with my client before our call, was all around like how you go about doing this. And I believe it's through what we call our willpower. It's the one part of ourselves that isn't really connected to any outside stimuli. You can will yourself to something with the entire environment telling you that you cannot do it, and you can still do it.
That's right.
It is a discernment of itself in a source, right? And so for me, that's where everything kind of starts, is like, what is your willpower to get stuff done? Do you think your will is strong? Do you think your will is weak? Does your will need some work? And depending upon how you answer that question determines where, for me at least, where you are in the process of learning how to surrender and learning how to hear your discernment better.
This is absolutely huge. The concept that you're explaining right now is absolutely huge. We live in an era right now where people are under so much anxiety, under so much stress, under so much pressure. And the pandemic is icing on the cake. The pandemic is just an extra ton on top of what you were already trying to do. And for men and for women, we were already trying to figure out how to be competitive in this world. We were already trying to figure out how to learn the things that we need to learn, and how to go out there and get on top of everything. And that is a trap, to your point. It's a trap. It's a trap to think that you are supposed to go out into the world and conquer everything that you see, or be number one at everything that you get involved in, and be the most competitive, and go around the world and climb the ranks everywhere. No, because burnout comes into play. Inferiority of the elements that exist out there come into play. The world is a huge place, and it's not meant for one person to go out there and dominate and conquer the whole thing. But that's exactly what so many of us have been tricked into doing. Young men are told, go outside and find a way for yourself. Young women are told, go out there and figure out how to take care of yourself and your family at a young age. Me, myself, I come out of the foster care system. I spent years of my life in the foster care system, and I understand how we take on this pressure and anxiety at a young age.
Yeah.
And as you grow up, you're in a situation where you don't know what to do. It crushes people. It causes people to commit suicide. It causes people to become a mockery of themselves. And what we need to do at the end of the day is learn how to surrender.
Yeah.
When you surrender, you take all that pressure off of yourself.
That's true.
When you surrender, you take that 10-ton weight off of yourself and your soul. You start reversing diseases. You start reversing mental disorders. You start reversing frustration. You start reversing dysfunctional relationships, all because you decide to surrender. Now, surrendering means filling yourself. Feel yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then it means being yourself. And in order to do that, you've got to listen. Now, what this man is saying to us today is that once we surrender, it's like your ears get so many more new faculties. They get bigger. Oh, what big ears you have.
Yeah.
Because now it's like your ears can do what they're supposed to do once you surrender. Your heart could do what it's supposed to do once you surrender. Your brain, your eyes, all your organs can do what they're supposed to do once you surrender. Absolutely. And now you know what's the next best move for yourself. So that's absolutely huge for you to say that way, and I love that. I appreciate that.
No problem.
Yeah. Now, what is the work that you do today?
Whew, man, I am a true Jamaican, so I have to maintain a 3-job minimum to keep active status.
4 jobs?
I gotta have at least 3 jobs. But by day, I work in tech. I work in the tech sector with regards to inclusion and diversity and getting more opportunities for Black and brown people to have access to the career paths in the growing tech world. By life, I am involved in all aspects of wellness, so mind, body, and soul wellness, making sure that we are well in how we show up every single day. A lot of that work involves working directly with men, helping them uncover a lot of the things we've been talking about today, focusing on, do you know how to surrender? Have you tapped into your vulnerability? And a lot of the balances that I feel our environments have created inequity between our masculine and our feminine energy. And so we often get those things confused, and we think masculine is man, and we think feminine is woman. It's just energy. Everyone has masculine and feminine inside of them. Yep. Can
you take a moment and explain that balance between masculine and feminine that we all need to accept, understand, and overstand? Now, this is a part of the conversation that transcends race. It transcends finance. It transcends socioeconomic status. Everyone, and this is not up for debate or opinion, everyone needs to understand this balance right here. Can you talk about it?
Sure. So I always look at it like a triangle, right? Yeah. If you've got masculine down here and feminine down here, up here is the oneness that created them both. So at the end of it all, everything comes back from a single source, right? However you define that source, again, is up to you, but it's all coming from one place. And so to assume that we as divine beings living a human experience are only one or the other in itself is to limit how powerful you truly are. Now, what you do with these energies is important. So from the masculine perspective, masculinity energetically is largely about action. It is forward movement. It is the thing that pushes something through, right? Femininity is more about creation. It's about something coming from nothing. It is the abundant power that exists from the source, because from the source, feminine came first. Feminine then birthed everything that came out of that. But the differentiation of things comes through the action. For example, when we look at the animal kingdom, there are animals that reproduce asexually, right? Those animals are most of the time feminine in terms of their DNA structure, right? They are seen as more feminine. They're seen as female in that structure. So they say that this is a female, feminine entity that reproduces asexually, meaning it needs no partner. What's interesting there is that the reproduction in that space is a clone. It's the exact copy. In order to get the differentiation, you need the seed. You need the masculine principle. You need the male aspect of things because it's action. It moves the thing forward as opposed to expanding it this way. So when you put it together, you get yin yang, you get balance, you get peace, you get harmony. But separately, they are volatile because they don't balance by themselves, right?
So now, this appears to be the state of so many communities, is that women are focused on being feminine and men are focused on being masculine.
Or you might have the opposite, right?
Or the opposite.
Where you've got
hold up
on both sides, yeah.
Any combination of permutation.
That's right.
But when you don't have both, you are handicapped. You are incomplete. You are unstable. And so for no matter which side you choose, right? Like he said, it goes both ways. We're not gender, we're not gender specific, we're gender fluid in this space right here. You've got to have balance. And from my example, as a man, I have to realize the woman that exists in me, the mothers, the aunts, the feminine energy that exists in me. So therefore, my heart can thrive, and therefore I know how to listen. So then when I go to do action, because I specialize in action, my actions are not going to be offensive. And this ties into what we were talking about in the very beginning of this conversation from this gentleman here, Cortni. And what he's also saying is that the women, or for whom it applies, has to also realize the fathers that exist in them. Right. And so women are capable of taking action as well. And so when we understand this balance, then now we can understand how to move up and forward as a community.
Right. Yeah. It puts us in an interesting spot when we accept that we are divine, meaning we have everything we already need to do what we're supposed to do. And that involves masculine and feminine energy on both sides. So a lot of the work that I do with men is around helping them to unpack, discover, define, and embrace what that means for them, because it is individual, right? Yep. There's no person that is one thing. So therefore, to assume, oh, I'm a man, so I'm masculine. You might be in these areas, but then in these host of other areas over here, you might lean more so to the feminine energetic. Do you know that? How do you handle that? And vice versa. And so a lot of the work that I do there is just around helping men, like I said, unpack and define that for themselves, better communicate in their space of partnership. How do you communicate this and lead? Because I will say this from a dynamic of relationships. I believe the masculine should lead, but the feminine owns the access to leadership.
That's right.
In order to be able to lead, you got to go through the feminine to get it. But because the masculine is based in action, it is better suited to lead. That's regardless of if you're a man or a woman, gender positive, gender fluid, whatever is masculine should lead, but it should only lead after it has been given access to leadership through the feminine concept.
That's right.
That's a lot of the work that I do on a regular.
I think that is phenomenal work. That is some of the most important work that can be done in our society today. The work of getting people to understand the balance that results in divine manifestations from us all. And when I say divine manifestation, I'm not trying to be technical or too hard to understand. What I'm saying is that our greatest potential lies in understanding who we are, so that we can cooperate with our family and our community members, so that we can have the biggest, best ambiance that we possibly can.
Yeah. Right.
How can we begin to have these sorts of conversations in the house before we, grow up and leave out the house?
I believe a lot of it starts with the acceptance of surrendering to the fact that we all got work to do, and listening for different voices as opposed to just what we're comfortable listening to, right?
What do you mean by that?
So, for example, an easy way is looking at, like, I hear often, when I'm involved in community or when I'm doing work, we need to have these conversations more often. This should be more widespread. And in my mind, it's always, well, I have these conversations all the time. All the people I interact with have these conversations. My universe, probably to a third or fourth degree, meaning who I'm connected to, who they're connected to, who they're connected to, are having these type of dialogues in some way, shape, or form. We may be using different words, but we're all talking about this stuff. So that says to me, this conversation, these aspects of how we can improve ourselves are not relegated to the outskirts of our society. They're here. It's just people got to pay attention to them if they want them. A lot of times we look to environments from a visual perspective, right? We are in a world where we're more voyeuristic than ever because of social media and what have you. But what we follow, right? What we choose to follow makes a big difference on what we choose to believe. So that's the first step I would say, is that if you are in a household and you are trying to have these conversations, whether it's with your partner, your children, or your parents, first take a look at what you're following. What are you paying attention to? What are you consuming information-wise on a regular basis that's preparing you to lead, preparing your masculine, right? And then also, where was that access given to that leadership?
Right.
If you're following somebody from a perspective of like an influencer, so to speak, and they're speaking a good game and they're talking a lot of these divine masculine principles, and this is manhood, and this is how you got to be, and this is what you got to do, but there's never any conversation about the balance to that. Mm-hmm. There's never a conversation about the beauty of the mothers, the grandmothers, that maternal energy that allows you to be able to lead. Then you should take stock of what that is actually giving you. It's not giving you the balance that you then want to go lead or talk about, right? The other piece to it is everything in moderation, including moderation. Mm-hmm. We got to be okay with the fact, like you said earlier, to not be in a hurry to do any of this stuff. I don't look at my life as the life that's going to change the world, but I do look at my legacy as the legacy that's going to change the world. And so my legacy for me is where I start to determine how I'll be able to create change. And it's not just my son, but it's my son's son's son, my daughter's daughter's daughters, right? It's the legacy that I put into place. I know my lineage because I've studied it and I've taken the time to understand who influenced who for what reasons. And now I know where I sit. And so my responsibility is two things: to do good and to be happy. If I can do good and I can be happy, I will leave my child with everything they need to know to then go do the same damn thing, and on and on and on. And that's for me where it all gets down to in the household is take good stock of if you're happy or not. Are you doing good in your own house, in your community? And COVID, unfortunately, has given a lot of people a lot of eye-opening time. I know people that are loving these experiences to be around their loved ones more, and I know people that are challenged by it, and I know people in between. I'm one of those people, right? I have a 5-year-old son that I co-parent with his mother, and the removal of the schoolhouse where we could both drop him off for a time to get a break, and it's just us going back and forth. Like, it created a new level of relationship between her and I because we now need each other more. Like, if you need a day off, you might want to be cool with me so I am in a good spirit to give it to you, and vice versa. Yeah. But COVID is exacerbating the already existent things that we needed to take care of, like you said. And I think this is one of the biggest ones. You're in your house now more than ever. So pay attention to what you're following. Take stock of it. Revamp it if you need to. And then once you start to follow new things, pay attention to what I always say is pay attention to what's leading the people that lead you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been on quite a journey today. If you've been following this conversation, and we're rounding third base here, I just want to remind everyone that just to what Cortni was saying today, while we might be helping each other, loving each other, thinking positive thoughts, being masterful behind closed doors, we have to also make sure that we manifest that so that the young people who are out here just looking for a solution in plain sight, a building that says solution on it, we have to also do that work as well. He spoke about 6 degrees of separation, and how up to 4 degrees, did you all catch that? Up to 4 degrees in his world, people are having conversations about balance, doing good, and being happy. Up to 4 degrees. That last 2 degrees, hey, give the world space. But that first 4, that was very powerful. They say, look at a man or a woman's friends, and I'll tell you who that person is. Are you controlling your first 4 degrees? We got work to do out there, y'all. We were reminded about a lot of that today in a very methodical and masterful way. Now, I got one question for you in about 7 seconds. What is greatness?
Oh, man. For me, greatness is peace. If I am able to truly be peaceful, then I am great.
I've listened to your story today. I've heard your journey. I've heard the wisdom that vibrates off of you. And I would like to give you your crown today. Ladies and gentlemen, get your crown emojis ready. Drop your crown emojis in the comment section. We're going to give you a crown today, Cortni Grange. We're also going to give you your respect while you can still acknowledge it. We are letting the world know, letting you know that you, Cortni Grange, are America's next motivator.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Much love. Much love.
I wish you much success, and I look forward to talking to you in the future, all right?
Most definitely.
Yes, sir. Thanks for stopping by today.
Thank you, man.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Each and every we got some crowns in the building. Each and every episode of America's Next Motivator is going to have something here for you. All you've got to do, just like you did today, is stop by and pick it up.